Join me on day 3 of my 2,000 kilometre cycle around Spain as I head west from Burgos through farmland and a number of small towns and villages, more or less following the Camino trail. So, just setting off on my overnight stay in Burgos, which is very well endowed with cycle paths. There's a nice one here I'm on running by the river, and hopefully that's going to take me most of the way out of town. We'll see. I could definitely have spent a bit more time in Burgos. I'd arrived late the previous evening after a very long day. I was pretty tired, so all I managed was a kebab meal. Got up, had breakfast in the hotel, and then went to the cathedral, which is quite spectacular but has rather a bit too much gold leaf. And then it was on to the route out of town, which, as you can see, is a pretty good dual way cycle track. It does flip from one side of the road to the other a few times, so it's helpful if you have turn by turn directions turned on, because that gives you some sort of warning as to where it's going each time. And then I'm now on the Camino trail, so for the next 4 days really, I'm going to be cycling along Eurovelo3, which for most of its length is the Camino trail. So that means you do meet quite a lot of walkers. It's useful to have a bell for this, or if you don't like the way some people get startled by a bell, to do a kind of hola as you approach them from behind, so they know there's somebody back there. It's still the case I had a few people who jumped basically because they'd obviously think they were in the middle of the countryside with nobody behind them, and then suddenly there'd be a voice right behind them. As you'll have noticed, some of the surfaces are quite rough, and often they run alongside roads, so depending on how busy the roads actually are, you may want to take the road instead for those parts. Disclaimer here, this is a little bit complicated by Spanish law, which apparently requires cyclists to use cycle paths where available. I rather suspect though, if it's a very rough track, you'd probably be okay. Just did a lunch stop in restaurant La Fuente behind me there. That was $12.50 for chicken with rice and salad. Very nice big portion too, actually. And came to $14.30 altogether, because I also had a glass of white wine, which I rounded up to 15. How much is the glass of white wine then? That was $1.80 or something. God, okay. There are a lot of people walking the Camino at this time of year. It's before the summer heat arrives. And I saw relatively few cyclists. I was more likely to see local cyclists out on gravel bikes. Got this impressively apocalyptic looking weather front sitting right over my head. But it's not actually raining, which is spooky. Maybe it will start. My chosen time of year for doing this, which is mid-May, was very much balancing the risk of rain, and I did see some rain, against the risk later in the year of basically getting roasted and needing to drink 8 litres of water a day. In terms of restaurants and cafes, it was fine on the Camino route. There's so many walkers, there's lots of them, and they are open at this time of the year. However, once I was off the Camino route, it was often the case that in isolated places there was little or nothing opening, because I was way ahead of when the tourist season proper starts. Something to consider when you're planning. I did meet a couple of touring cyclists, here's some, on the Camino route, but otherwise they were pretty rare at the time of year I was travelling throughout Spain. Really off Camino route I met none at all. I did see quite a lot of lycra-clad road cyclists that were sort of out for one-day spins, but people laden down with panniers or even with a bike-packing setup were quite unusual, apart from the Camino route. Now, I had thought in advance of this being a relatively easy day. There wasn't much climbing involved, and it was only about 75 kilometres. However, as you'll have noticed so far, with the exception of this stretch, it's mostly been dirt track, and often quite rough. There's long stretches of this where it was quite hard to get above 11 or 12 kilometers an hour, so actually it was quite slow going and quite tough going. I'd also imagine if there had been a lot more rain, that might have made things very difficult. As it was, local sections were quite flooded, I think because the rain was happening in very heavy showers, but these showers were pretty infrequent and not hitting everywhere. As you'll see in particular from the still photography inserts, it was very beautiful. It's quite a stunning landscape. It's not completely flat, you know, you are going up and down these hills, and the colours are very spectacular. My GoPro on the handlebars really doesn't do a great job of capturing that, particularly when it's in time-lapse, so the still photographs give you a much better idea of what I was seeing. The Camino route also has a fair amount of these stickers advertising local B&Bs and things. It does have the big advantage that it's much easier to find accommodation, and particularly cheap accommodation, than it is once you're off route. Disadvantage being the walkers. Of course, one magic trick would be to cycle the route in the opposite direction. That way the walkers are facing you as you come across them, but it's really not that much of a hassle. As I said, you're mostly on the Camino walking trail, but for some parts, including this section here, it's going off to one side and up over that hill. I would guess maybe the trail itself is too rough to walk, whereas this is a nice, very straight road with very little traffic on it. Again, the Eurovelo3 planners presumably made these selections, and this rejoins it at a particularly spectacular point, which is this monastery. There is a cafe shop here, but it wasn't open. There was just a vending machine. I did have a chat with a couple of other cyclists about the route though. Of course, the other benefit with it following the Camino route is that that route, being an old pilgrimage route, has lots of historic castles and monasteries and churches along it. So it's very scenic, and each of the towns is competing with the others to be more attractive. This is Castro Jerez, which is about halfway, a little over halfway on my total route, but unfortunately had the centre blocked off, so I had to do a loop back out of the town and navigate my way around. I did run into quite a lot of closed roads on my total trips in Spain, and as you will see, towards the end of the trip, about the fourth last day, I had a particularly tough day where some important roads were closed that put me on huge diversions, but we'll get to that story in a few days' time. Perhaps 3/4 of the 40 kilometres done so far today have been on rough dirt tracks, so I was actually quite glad of the following 10 kilometres, which are on good quality roads. Possibly if you're walking the Camino, this bit is a little boring because basically you're just going two long roads that are going way uphill to a, well, not way uphill, uphill to a pass. Very straight and quite dull, and probably takes about 3 hours for you to actually walk them, but on a bike you're flying through all this in 40 or 50 minutes, and it's still pretty enough. But yeah, get up here, down to the river, and then turn right onto a little bit more dirt track, which is taking us on to the next town. And I stopped in an Albuquerque on the edge of this town to get myself a pastry and coffee. Again, the benefit of being on the Camino route is even on this time of year there's plenty of refueling stops. So through this town, and then we're back onto some dirt track. I'm getting pretty tired at this stage, and I think I've still got about 15 to 20 kilometres to go. I'm also aware that I'm staying in a tiny village, and there doesn't appear to be anywhere that does food there in the locality, so I need to stop off. This, by the way, was a particularly rough section of track. I was right down to 10 kilometres for quite a bit of it, and as you can see, somewhat flooded. So I suspect if you'd have a lot of rain, this might be very hard indeed to navigate. My memory of it is doing calculations of what time I'd actually arrive at, and was that going to leave me enough time for food. But 15 kilometres to go, and I'm now getting close enough that I can be fairly confident about that. Another stretch of not so rough track. This bit I could move a bit faster on before I hit the canal. So this was cool. I was really enjoying this. Quite rough, but I was going, this is absolutely fantastic. And then what happened? Well, yes, another closed road. And so a diversion off into fields. I'm nervous about how far this will take. It actually makes me do 3 sides of a rectangle and then brings me to the canal again 100 metres from where I started. And now it's time to say goodbye to Eurovelo1. I'd been on 65 kilometres of that, and of course that also runs through Ireland and Scotland. But now it's just Eurovelo3 and the Camino for the next 3 or so days. So I had a plan to stop here for food. Unfortunately, the fancy restaurant I'd earmarked was closed. So after scanning around, I did find a pub which thankfully was doing pizza, and it was good pizza too. As I finish off my pizza and get back on the bike heading out of town, I notice that the threatening rain clouds have got a lot closer, and I appear to be cycling straight into them. So
There's a Camino route running alongside the main road here. I did that section of it and it was just way too rough and slow. And with the rain coming in, I decided, okay, I'm going to take to the main road. There wasn't that much traffic on it and I could make much better pace, as you can see here. So the route, the Camino route and Eurovelo3 actually splits off through this town, and then there's some sort of rough gravel track it follows. I decided, however, to go back onto the main road because the rain had arrived. This was torrential. I got completely soaked in the space of about 5 kilometers of cycling. However, luckily at this point I'm pretty much at my final destination for the night, which is a very, very small village and a pension in that village, La Casona de Donna Petra, which was €50 a night. I think breakfast cost about an extra €5 or €6, and as there's nothing else in the town, you probably definitely want to do the breakfast as well, which is continental in size but substantial. And so that gets us through day 3 of my 2,000-kilometer trip around North Spain. You've got it all happening on that side rather than this side. Give the channel a follow so you get the rest of the updates. I'm going to do day-by-day diaries for all 22 days and also a video about getting on and off the ferry. If you look back through the archive, you'll find last summer I cycled about the same distance around the Scottish Islands and Highlands, and I've done about 4,000 to 5,000 kilometres around Ireland, mostly following the coast. So you'll find diaries for all those. You'll also find a lot of videos on aspects of bike packing and cycle touring. You know, what sort of gear to use, e-bike touring in particular, keeping your batteries charged, all those sort of questions you might have, because I'm looking forward to meeting you all on the road. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, give it a thumbs up, helps me get out to more people. And to follow my future adventures live as I do them, give my Instagram account a follow as well. I post from that live to the road. These YouTube videos get edited together later, and that is e-bike touring live as well. Thanks for watching. See you on the road.